I'd like to thank the Center for Public Leadership for all their hard work in putting this event together, especially Jen Wardell, who's worked tirelessly in arranging all of this. I'd like to thank Hunter and Marie for being here this evening, traveling to join us. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here to hear quite an inspirational story. Many of you are familiar with the story of Pat Tillman. He's an NFL star. He made national news when he left the National Football League to join the U.S. Army and become a Ranger. I was a senior in college at the time, and I vividly remember being inspired when I heard the news about Pat deciding to turn down an NFL contract and join the armed services, because I had already done my training for the Marine Corps and was headed into the Marines as an officer upon graduation, and it reaffirmed my commitment that what I was doing was a noble and worthy cause. Tragically, as we all know, Pat was killed in Afghanistan in 2004, and it was an event that really shook the nation. A year later, I found myself in Afghanistan, passing through Bagram Air Base, and spent a few short hours at the Pat Tillman USO, which was named in his honor. And I remember being there, looking around and just kind of feeling a sense of awe and reverence for the man for whom the building was named. I didn't know that I'd be here now 6 years later, standing in front of you tonight with the honor of being a Tillman Military Scholar and having the privilege of introducing someone whose life is equally as inspiring. We're here tonight to hear from Marie Tillman, who is the founder and chair of the Pat Tillman Foundation. She's a native of San Jose, California, who graduated with honors from the University of California, Santa Barbara. And after her husband's death, Marie was instrumental in founding the Tillman Foundation in 2004. And it was created to honor Pat by investing in veterans and their families and helping them to return to college and pursue an education. Since its inception, the Tillman Foundation has given $1.3 million to veterans and their families to return to school. And they currently sponsor 111 veterans at 46 schools around the country, veterans and family members, 46 schools around the country in 28 states. Hunter just gave me all the statistics when he got here tonight. I want to make sure I got those right. We have 5 Tillman Military Scholars here at Harvard, all graduate students, and we'll be speaking with you later. But tonight, please join me in welcoming Marie Tillman.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you. Like a lot of people, I think my road to service is one that took a lot of turns and many detours along the way. I grew up in a Northern California town, sort of a small community, and my childhood was not really geared towards service. It wasn't something that was necessarily instilled in us. We participated in school food drives, and we, gathered our clothing and our toys, and we donated them to shelters and that sort of thing. But it wasn't really part of my upbringing. So service was something that really came more into my life at a much later time. When I was growing up was actually also when I met my husband, though. And I think that, while we both led relatively sheltered existence in sort of this small community in Northern California, he had a much more, his childhood was much more full of stories of service and sacrifice, and his family really sort of ingrained in them the honor of serving in the military, and a lot of their family members served in the military. So that was definitely much more a part of his upbringing. So we went to college, and really didn't think that much about what it was that we wanted to give back to our communities or to the country. But I think that, like a lot of people in this room, when September 11th happened, we really took a step back. And at that time, Pat was playing football with the Arizona Cardinals, and we led this really great life. We had friends and family that were close by in Phoenix, and we traveled and we enjoyed our time there, and it was really just sort of a great, sort of happy existence. But September 11th happened, and we took a step back and said, this is something important that's going on at this point in our country, and really something that we wanted to participate in a much more meaningful way. We wanted to sort of gear our lives towards something that was more meaningful at the time. And Pat in particular felt that calling to serve. And so he decided that he would join the Army. So, we did a lot of research, and I supported the decision. I thought that it was something that would sort of be, I naively thought that this would be, an adventure. And 3 years later, we would go back to our normal life. And, it would be one of those things where when we were old, we would think back and go, oh, remember when you were in the military and wasn't that so fun and great and, this great thing that you did? And in a lot of ways, I think that it was a great thing that he did, but certainly the road went a different direction than we originally thought. So we left this life in Arizona and we moved up to Fort Lewis, Washington. And really, this was my indoctrination into what it means to be not only part of a military family, but also what it means to serve. And it was drastic, to say the least. It was difficult. Shortly after Pat was out of basic training, he deployed to Iraq. And I had a really hard time. I was home alone in Washington, and I didn't really know anybody. And I was really worried. There was no communication at that time. It was right in the beginning of the Iraqi war. And so, I sort of sent him off without knowing at all where he was going or what he would be doing or when I would hear from him. So it was really stressful. But I think that even though it was difficult at that time, there was a lot of really great things that came from that as well. For me, it was the first time that I felt like our lives were part of something that was bigger. I felt like we were focused on something that was greater than the individual, and we really became a part of this military family. And I liked that experience. I liked that feeling of being part of something that was greater than we were and really focused on sort of contributing to a greater good. So, while there were difficult times, there was also a lot of positive stuff that came out of his first sort of deployment overseas. And thankfully, he came back home safely. And I think that when he came home, it was another big wake-up call. It was the realization that the ideals for which he had joined, there's a reality to that, and there's a reality to the hardships that soldiers go through, that their families go through, and what it means to serve your country and serve overseas. And so, he came back definitely sobered from the experience, but still very much. He still very much believed in the reasons why he joined. He believed in, sort of what this country was built upon: freedom and equality and democracy, and all of these ideals were definitely things that he still believed in. But it was a more difficult experience than I think we both originally thought. So shortly after he came back from Iraq, he was home for a little while, and then he deployed to Afghanistan. And during this time, too, for me, it was something that I became much more involved and interested in the conflicts overseas. I started reading up on what was going on. And, up until this point, I was very removed from, I think, what was going on, not only politically in Washington and internationally, but just sort of not as engaged or interested in what was going on. And I felt like now these things were personally affecting me, that decisions that were being made were having a direct impact on my husband's life and my life. And, I would sort of talk to my friends and my colleagues and people I would encounter, and I felt like everybody was really apathetic and didn't really care that much. And they weren't engaged, and I was frustrated. And, it was kind of an awakening for me to realize that I had been just like them. I mean, we, even up until the point, I would say, until Pat went overseas, we had made this decision together, and he had joined, and we were very sort of happy with ourselves and proud to be a part of this military family. But I hadn't really dug in and learned that much about what that meant. And so I started to become a little bit more vocal, and I would sort of, implore my friends and family members and colleagues to sort of get involved and get engaged and know what's going on. And, I realized that, when you sign up and you decide to serve, that you're really sort of giving your lives up to the American people and politicians in Washington, and you're saying, here's my life, and I dedicate it to you in service of this country, and what I need from you is for you to not needlessly put me in harm's way. You need to know that my life is valuable and make decisions that speak to that. And I didn't really realize that at all before this happened. And so, I would talk to people about that, and I became a little bit more vocal than I think I had been in the past. So Pat went to Afghanistan, and unfortunately, he didn't come back safely this time. And it was devastating for me. I felt like my world just completely crumbled. And I had, within sort of all of that fog of grief in the very beginning, though, there was a little bit of clarity, strangely, that came, particularly in the first sort of month or so. And I had this realization that life is short, and that, I wanted mine to matter. I wanted to continue this journey of service that we had started together, and I wanted to make sure that my time, however long or short that I had left on this planet, was used for something good. That he was gone, but I was still here, and I should use this time and know that it's precious and use it for something good. So that lasted, I'd say, probably about a month or so. And then we learned that he was actually killed by fratricide. And sort of what ensued after that were many years of lies and investigations. And I really got lost. I got caught up in sort of my own grief and the fight to find out what happened. And I think that from that point, what I really wanted was an escape. I was just trying to survive, and I didn't have the energy or anything like that to try and change the world. So I left Fort Lewis and I moved to New York. And I thought, okay, let me just sort of get lost in this city and I'll wander the streets. And, I really craved sort of to be able to just be anonymous and just kind of like get caught up in the energy of the city. So I moved to New York and I found a job with ESPN television network. And I took this job, and it was really kept me extremely busy. I basically just threw myself into my work. I traveled all over the country, and I did events and sort of catered to athletes and celebrities. And I had a good time. I loved the people that I worked with, but it was a soulless job, and I knew that it was a soulless job. So while I was very distracted and not happy, I wouldn't call it happy, but I was certainly distracted and content enough. So I just sort of went about my days and did my job and did the things that I knew that I was supposed to do. And at night, I sort of reserved that time to sort of wallow in my grief and try and figure out how to put the pieces of my life back together in a way that would be meaningful to me. And sort of all along at this time, there was this nagging in the back of my head of, remember that path that you started together, and remember that feeling of wanting your life to be worth something more than just your individual little life. And, remember how you wanted to do something that was going to be impactful and meaningful, and this precious life that you have, what are you doing with it? And I didn't really feel great about it at the time, but I was still sort of just trying to get by. And so I would try to cut myself a little bit of slack, and I would try not to get too angry at myself that I wasn't able at that time to really focus on the things that I wanted to focus on. So that sort of went on for a couple years. And then about 3 years after Pat was killed, the investigations were sort of gone, and we'd kind of, everything had settled down a little bit, and I'd actually moved back to the West Coast to be closer to friends and family. I was still working for ESPN, and I thought, okay, now it's time. Now I'm better able to manage my life and my grief, and now this sort of persistent nagging of what are you doing with your life was really starting to bug me. So, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And, during all of this time, there was one sort of bright spot in all of it, and that was the work that I did with the foundation. We had set up the Pat Tillman Foundation shortly after Pat was killed, and at that time, it was really a way to kind of harness all of this goodwill and energy that we were receiving from across the country and focus it on something that would be good in his memory. And so we set up this program at his alma mater, Arizona State University, and it was a leadership service program. And we had about 25 students a year that would go through this program, and it was very service focused, but and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with the students. It was kind of a sort of a side thing that I did. We had a person who was running it, and I just was participating on the board and helping with the direction and that sort of thing. But I really enjoyed it. I would go out to Arizona and I would talk to the kids that were in the program, and I felt like they were young and ambitious and idealistic, and it was inspiring. And I really was not feeling much of that on a day-to-day basis at that time. So I sort of cherished these moments that I had with them, but I wasn't sure exactly what to do with all of that. So here I am in California, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with my life now? Here I am, have probably a long life to live, and I just had no idea. So I quit my job, and I figured I would just figure it out. And something that I often do, which may sound like running, I think it's more exploring to find myself, but often when I'm in a tough spot, I travel. And so that's what I did. I quit my job and I went to South America, and I'm sure my friends and my family thought that I was having some sort of nervous breakdown, but I decided that I would just go to South America and see something new and sort of get away, find a new perspective, and it was great. And so I went down there and I went to Buenos Aires and I sort of wandered the streets, and I thought about all these big life questions. I thought about, why are we here and what's it all about, and what do I want it to be about, and what's my impact and all this stuff. And I tried to think about a time when I was really happy. And actually, I surprised myself, because what came to me first is I remember when Pat joined the Army. And I remembered how happy we were, and how happy we were to be part of this military family and to be focused, all of us focused on this thing that wasn't about each of us individually, but it was about something bigger. And I wanted to get back to that place. So I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking about sort of the work that we do with the foundation. And I remember, too, these two brothers that had served in Iraq and were students in our program at ASU, and they were Marines. And they had come home, and they were on campus at ASU, and they were feeling disconnected, and they were feeling like they had this experience in their life that was very meaningful and life-changing to them, and they were back on a college campus, and nobody cared. Nobody saw their experience as valuable. Nobody thought that their perspective was valuable, or that they could use that experience and bring it back to their community and do something good with it. People were just, either apathetic towards them or didn't understand, or, all of these things, and it made me mad. I felt like, maybe there was a place here where we could help, that maybe that this organization could help not only, take these young veterans and sort of embrace them and help them get an education and continue their service back home, but also help the communities on campus understand what they had been through and understand that it's really valuable and worthwhile and should be honored. So I came back from South America really with what I was looking for. I was rejuvenated, I was refocused, and I felt like what I wanted to do was take this organization that was started really as a memorial organization that was, we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, a bunch of people sent checks, and we said, okay, we'll start a foundation. So it was very much focused around Pat's death and sort of remembering that and celebrating that. But I wanted to build from that. I wanted to turn it into an organization that could be impactful and longstanding and could be more about one person's death, but about the lives of all these young people that come home, and to honor Pat's life by honoring these men and women. So that's what we did. And we really sort of refocused the mission of the organization to support veterans and their family members. And it was, and still is not, an easy road. I mean, just because I came back resolved to do this does not mean that it happened overnight by any means. But it's something that I'm really happy that we've done. So in 2008, we started the Tillman Military Scholars program, and now we have 111 that we support across the country. And we're really dedicated towards helping these young men and women that we think have an invaluable life experience and helping them continue their service, reintegrate into their communities, and continue their service. So that was sort of the next chapter in the journey of service that started for me. And it was not an easy road by any chance. And, there were a lot of times during that time that I would particularly in times that were difficult, I would look to something that Pat had written actually when he had decided to join the Army. And I wanted to share that with you tonight too. It's something that really speaks to me, and I hope that it's something that will speak to you as well. It's dated April 8th, 2002. Many decisions are made in a lifetime, most relatively insignificant, while others are life-altering. Tonight's topic being the latter. It must be said that my mind is made up for the most part. More to the point, I know what decision I must make. It seems that more often than not, we know the right decision long before it's actually made. Somewhere inside, we hear a voice, and we intuitively know the answer to any problem or situation we encounter. Our voice leads us in the direction of the person we wish to become, but it is up to us whether or not to follow. More times than not, we are pointed in a predictable, straightforward, and seemingly positive direction. However, occasionally we are directed down a different path entirely. Not necessarily a bad path, but a more difficult one. In my case, a path that many will disagree with, and more significantly, one that may cause a great deal of inconvenience to those I love. I'm not sure where this new direction will take my life, though I'm positive it will include its share of sacrifice and difficulty. Despite this, however, I'm equally positive that this new direction will, in the end, make our lives fuller, richer, and more meaningful. My voice is calling me in a different direction. It's up to me whether or not to listen. There's certainly been some times of sacrifice and difficulty along the roads, but I agree with Pat. I think that this road of service has made my life more meaningful, full, and richer. And I'm really glad that though I lost my way many times along the journey, that I found my way back to that journey that we started together. Not only do I feel like it helps honor him and the life that he led, but it also helps honor all of these young veterans that come home. So I'm so happy that I found my way back and that I'm able to continue that work and help this young generation of veterans. So you guys will get a chance to meet our 5 that are here tonight as well.
I'd just like to start off by saying thank you to Marie. I'm lucky enough to be able to work with this inspirational lady on a daily basis, and now to be sharing the stage with her is an even bigger honor. So another round of applause. I'd also like to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to Harvard for having us here, and to the Center of Public Leadership, Center for Public Leadership, and Jennifer and everyone else on the staff over there. We had this idea back in the end of October, sometime around there. So it's been months in the working, and all the details have come together in the past couple weeks now. So, I mean, even up to the point of my flight getting in about an hour ago, and rushing over here and hustling to make it in time for this. But I appreciate everyone for being here. As Jennifer said, tonight we're going to continue with a conversation with Marie and actually 4 of our Tillman Military Scholars, unless Jonathan Cho has shown up in the room. We have 4 here with us tonight, and I'd like to do a brief introduction. We have some questions that we'll start off the night with, and then the second half of the discussion, we'll take the note cards from what you pass down the aisle and go from there. So the scholars are prepared for what has been asked over the last 2 weeks. We only got 1 question on Twitter. We were trying to get people to tweet. Everyone was old-fashioned and just sent it in with the RSVPs. So to begin the night in alphabetical order, I'd like to introduce Brett Gibson. Brett is from Virginia Beach, Virginia. He is an Army Ranger who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan and is the current student body president at Harvard Business School. So Brett, welcome to the podium. Take a seat anywhere. Next is Catherine Glenn. She is first and foremost a mother of 2, but was raised in Yokohama, Japan. She went to the Naval Academy and then served as a naval helicopter pilot. So thank you for joining us here, Catherine. Reagan Turner, who you all met, who introduced Marie, from Floresville, Texas. joined the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M University, and then became a Marine Corps infantry officer. And before stepping on campus here, was down in Quantico, Virginia at the basic school and the infantry officer course, teaching for 3 years? For 3 years. So welcome to Reagan. And then I warned Joel about this joke, but many of you may have seen him before, because before stepping onto campus at Harvard, Joel was an actor in Southern California, playing roles in sitcoms such as House and in movies such as Race to Witch Mountain. So Joel was also, Joel was a Marine Corps helicopter pilot. I believe you flew Cobras, and he is now at the Harvard Kennedy School. So welcome, Joel. And just one last call out, if Jonathan is not here, Jonathan Cho is our 5th Tillman Military Scholar here at Harvard. He is at Harvard Business School and came to Harvard after a career as an Army captain. So if you don't see Jonathan, obviously he's not here tonight because no one's standing up. If you see him around campus later, you know him, congratulate him on his honor as a Tillman Military Scholar. And right before we get started, both Marie and Reagan mentioned to you all tonight that we have 111 Tillman Military Scholars nationwide, obviously 5 of which are here at Harvard's campus. $1.3 million to those 111 students in the first 2 classes. Alone here at Harvard, we've awarded almost $75,000 to these 5. So we're going to continue to try to increase that number, and hopefully if any student veterans or military family members are in the crowd, our application opens up on Monday. That's my plug for the night. So we'll get started. I have questions for both Marie that came from the RSVPs and for the scholars, but the first one I'd like to get to is actually applicable to every single person up here. And I'll just read from the list I have. Again, this is for each of you to answer. The question is, not many people of Pat's fame and wealth join the military today. Why do you think that in this case, or why do you think that this is the case, and what do we as a country need to do to compel people of affluence to serve in the armed forces? So whoever would like to start, Marie, do you want to say something to that effect? I know we talked about this.
Yeah, and Hunter and I did talk about this earlier. I don't necessarily think it's a matter of affluence. I think it's more a matter of getting more of a cross-section of the population to serve. And I, for one, am a proponent of compulsory service, whether it be military or public service. So that's my take on it. Go ahead.
Hello? I think this is on. So I think Marie makes a really good point. I think right now something like 1% of the U.S. population serves. So I think it's less a matter of affluent people not serving. I think it's just that not many people serve, period, in the military. I can't speak to people's motivations to serve or not serve. I think maybe one thing that I can bring to this is that in some studies that I've read about decisions that people make to stay or leave the service, it's not the money, it's not the pay, it's not the bonuses, it's job satisfaction. And it's the decision to stay or leave is based a lot on how you feel your career progression is, what kind of promotional opportunities you have, and then also, of course, fitting that in with family. So I think maybe on the Department of Defense's side, potentially there could be things that they could open it up to more sectors of the population.
I agree with definitely with what Kate said, and I think a lot of people just don't know how incredible of an opportunity awaits you if you do serve in the military, because they've never been exposed to that. I've met people here in school who didn't know a single veteran before they encountered me or some of my friends who we go to grad school with, and I'm sure it's the same case with undergraduate veterans who may be here on campus. So it's really just for generations there was kind of a disconnect, and hopefully we are working to correct that, but we're certainly doing our best. But it's certainly a privilege to work with the fine young men and women in the armed forces, and I think if more people knew what they were missing out on, they'd join.
I agree completely with that. I look back on my military service, and the cross section of people that I serve with, the men and women, were extraordinary, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. And I think that just needs to be communicated to people that, this is an opportunity to really expand your horizons and meet people that you otherwise would never meet and serve side by side with people that you would never meet. And the other thing I'll say is I wish that on a national level, we had more of a discussion about service and about the merits of service. It seems like there's an absence of that, except for in certain areas, and certainly this is a great way to do that. I just wish there was more of a national dialogue about it.
And I would just add very briefly that I think that there's a perception that certain skills that a lot of people in this room have might not be utilized by the military, where in fact, I believe people in this room are the most needed in the armed forces because of your analytical skills, your ability to make a decision, your ability to communicate that decision, your ability to inspire people and align people and bring together a team. It's sad that I think there's a perception that the military doesn't deserve the best of our country, where in fact I think the military needs the best of our country. And it develops those skills that then churns you out into the world as a leader that can make a difference. So I believe it was a fantastic experience.
Yeah. So this next question actually is directed at Marie, but then after she answers, again, you guys can add to it. Marie, you seem to have a great focused message to share about the importance of supporting educational opportunities, but I wonder if that can be overshadowed by the public awareness of Pat's life and death, in parentheses. When you meet with the press, the public, or potential supporters, how do you separate out the controversy and prying eyes to get them to focus on the goals you're trying to achieve?
It's a good question, and it's definitely difficult sometimes. And I think in time I have learned to sort of steer the conversation, the direction that I want it to go. But I also recognize that Pat's story is high profile, and it's an opportunity to help tell the stories of all of the other men and women that serve because people are interested in his story. So I try to look at it that way and kind of steer it back.
Yeah, if anyone else has comments on, the struggle. I know I face it on a daily basis because we get phone calls, at least weekly from people who don't even know what we do as a foundation and don't know what Marie told you about today. Have you guys been asked those questions when you tell people that you're a Tillman Military Scholar? Do they automatically?
Yes. Yeah, I've had the experience a couple of times where, there's sort of an assumption from some people who don't know the work that the foundation does, that this is a sort of a cult of personality, I guess is the best way. And I get the question sometimes, why is Pat Tillman deserving of a foundation more than any other person? The 4,000 people who have passed away in these conflicts. And I guess what I've sort of said is what Marie's already intonated, which is when you have publicity, when you have a publicly recognized name, to not use that to do good is irresponsible. So really what this is a organization that took advantage of that name that was out there to do so much good. And also, I sort of made the point that really that kind of, cult of personality, that sort of, hero worship is really antithesis to what Pat did. He stepped away from the NFL to serve, to become an anonymous Army Ranger. And so that's sort of my answer to it, that it's really his legacy of stepping away from fame.
Yeah, and I'd also just like to add to that I point people back to the mission of the foundation, which is really an investment in the future and the men and women who are still around. And you can't really argue with that. That's good. And so that's what I do.
Yeah. So this next question is for you all, the scholars. And it's a pretty basic question I'm sure you get on a daily basis from your professors or your classmates. But how does your military experience shape your view on your educational goals? And vice versa, how does your educational experience affect how you think about your military experience?
So first, I guess we didn't get to say this, but thank you so much to the Tillman Foundation. It is a complete honor, and Hunter didn't give himself an introduction, but Hunter was one of Pat's close friends.
No.
Oh.
I'm not one of Pat's close friends, one of Marie's friends, though.
Sorry, a friend of their family. And I so admire the way that they've respected Pat through this foundation. So how does this relate to educational goals? I think, there's a quote that says, "For unto whomsoever much is given, of him much is required." And for those in the room that have served, we've come back. We're here. We can tell the story. We've served overseas and developed the kind of leadership capacity from that. And now it's our responsibility to go back and give more. And by being in a place like Harvard, my gosh, I mean, I never grew up thinking I would end up at an institution like this to learn. And that just doubles the responsibility to go forward and do better things and more service to the community.
And I agree totally with what what Brett said. He was on MSNBC. He's famous. I don't do this all the time. But also, I think that my military service has really given me such an appreciation for being in school here, and I view it as such a privilege. I think that some of my classmates who I see out here get mad at me probably when I look at them from across the room to, put their laptops or their cell phones away in class, or, and I just view it as such an honor to be here in school every day, and it's have such a responsibility to learn and to soak as much as you can out of this experience, because once it's over, and then we'll go forth, like Brett said, and we're expected, and we want to do these great things, but it's such a precious opportunity. I think my military service really showed me how valuable life is, and to never take things for granted. And so I approach my education here the same way.
Well, I guess, I definitely agree that I think the 10 years I spent in the Navy it matured me, and I was sort of a spoiled brat, only child, grew up overseas. The Naval Academy and then the Navy after that really, really changed my life and changed the direction of my life. I think one thing also, though, that for me, this education is a pivot point. It's a career shift. And the reason I say that, the reason I emphasize that, is that I think that everybody who serves in the military, certainly, also in places like the Department of State, foreign service officers, whenever you have this kind of position, and they are both incredibly honorable professions, you can be the absolute best at your profession and strive for it, and that is an honorable and good thing to do. But you also have to be very comfortable with the fact that you are a tool of policy. Whether you agree with it or not, you're a tool of policy, and your job is to go out and execute that policy operationally without disagreeing, certainly without voicing contention, complaining. I personally had a moment. I was in the Gulf right around the same time that Pat was deployed for the first time, and I have this vivid memory of passing through the Straits of Hormuz, pre-flighting an aircraft, greasy up to my elbows, 120 degrees on the flight deck, going, "Preemptive strike? Are you kidding me?" And I had this sort of moment, and that's when I realized that I felt like I had done everything I could do as a military officer. With the very few exceptions of very senior people, you're a tool, not a crafter of policy. And so for me, this education is a chance to take that experience and pivot it into being a crafter of policy, so I can actually influence the policies. And like Marie mentioned in her speech, make sure that this country is carefully applying force and carefully using those jobs, those lives that are sort of presented to it.
Yeah, I agree completely. I had a commanding officer, squadron commander, who made the statement to the entire squadron that he wished there was more military veterans amongst the policymakers and amongst the members of Congress and amongst the different departments in the federal government. And that stuck with me, and a lot of my fellow pilots felt the same way. And so I think about what they told me back then and what we discussed over the years, and so I take this very seriously.
All great answers, by the way. This next question is actually a little lighthearted, but I liked it from the list of, we probably actually got 30 to 35 questions from the RSVPs and one from Twitter. But this one was actually aimed at Marie, but I think it's also a good question for all of you to answer. Marie, what did you want to do before all this happened? What did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a younger girl?
It is, well, and it is more lighthearted, but I'm actually going to take it a little bit more in a serious direction. Okay. Because I think that one thing that I've learned through all this is that, not to sound cheesy, but life is a journey, and what it means to be here is to continue to evolve and grow and have new experiences and learn from those. And I really do appreciate the experience that my life has had over the last, gosh, it's now been, since Pat joined me, 8 years, I guess. And so I'm much more open to life and not saying this is where I need to be when I need to be there, or this is what I want to be. But taking things as they come and sort of using those experiences, as I go along.
So when you were a little girl, you didn't want to be a ballerina?
No, I actually, okay, fine, you want to go back?
Yeah,
I
that's
wanted
what I'm
to
asking.
be, I wanted to be a jockey.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my grandpa had racehorses. I wanted to be a jockey. I'm too tall.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, let's go down the line, Joel.
I wanted to be an actor.
A movie star.
Yeah.
And, I didn't really, I kind of led a similar life growing up where service wasn't necessarily emphasized. I mean, there were little things. And it really wasn't until getting to college in ROTC when I started to get exposed to the military. And over the course of my time there, I really fell in love with it. And I realized that, life is not about me. It's about your friends and family and the people you serve with and your community and your nation. And but then I went and was an actor after the Marine Corps.
You can do it all, right?
So I remember Miss Bird's 8th grade English class, and we got asked what we wanted to be when we grew up in the context of you're stranded on a desert island, and your profession is going to help all the people you're stranded with survive. And I said I wanted to be a baseball player. And she didn't like my essay very much, needless to say. But I went to school. I thought I was going to be an engineer. I loved math and physics, and I was that nerd that was doing calculus and computer problems and stuff on Saturday nights in the lab. And then I just got inspired in college by one of my professors who'd been in the CIA for 30 years, and I heard him give a talk kind of in a setting like we're at tonight, and he talked about living a lifetime of service, and it really resonated with me. And I remember I went home, I thought about it, and I had 2 grandfathers who had both served in World War II. And I called my mom the next day. I said, I'm joining the military, and she started crying. And so that's kind of how I ended up, here all these years later. But I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So trying to figure that out.
I had no idea. When I applied to college, I applied to everywhere from the Rhode Island School of Design to pre-med programs. I really had no idea. Going to the Naval Academy was actually an act of rebellion on my part. My parents are both Ivy League egghead academics. I'm their only daughter. And I went to a very, very sort of academically snooty private high school in Japan, of all places. And so saying, screw you, Mom and Dad, I'm joining the Navy. And I went off, and my mom called me baby killer for 2 weeks when I told her I was joining the Navy. But they're now proud Navy parents.
My dream was a little less inspiring. I, in all seriousness, wanted to be a trash man when I was a kid. Just because I thought it was amazing that they got to ride on the back of the truck. And I just thought it would be a lot of fun. But, Marie's words resonated with me when she read Pat's letter because of the hunch that it sounded he had, that he kind of had known that there was a right decision to join the military, that a final decision is just the culmination of many sort of serendipitous things that happened before it. I'd say most of my life has been that way, except for me for joining the military, because sort of like Pat, and I've always felt connected to the story of Pat Tillman, 9/11 was sort of a game changer for me. I was a senior at the University of Virginia at the time, had already accepted a full-time corporate job position, hadn't expected to serve. Both my grandfathers, much like Reagan, had served in World War II. One was a Marine Corps colonel that served in World War II, Vietnam, and Korea. I admired them very much, but never thought I would live up to their legacy. When 9/11 happened, I felt just like as a young American, again, sort of like with the great reward of being born in this country, I had a responsibility at that time. So I decided to serve, and I'm not sure what life looks like in the future. I'm still in the Massachusetts Army National Guard. I think, though, I'll say the greatest moment of my life so far was coming back from my trip to Afghanistan, and my grandfather, who had served for those 33 years as a colonel in the Marine Corps, was there on the parade field, and he passed away just days later. But I felt to have that connection to his legacy, and for him, he had now left a second generation on this planet that served behind him. That was really something I'll never beat.
I got one of these. I won't answer the question because mine's not as cool or funny. I wish I could have been a jockey. That would have been cool.
Me too, yeah.
No, really, Marie knows this, and my friends from Arkansas who are here in the crowd today know this. I have a twin brother who he's an artist, and I always just thought I'd just want to be whatever he wanted to be. But now he's like doing nothing with this. No, he's an artist doing a lot with his life, but it's a lot different than the way my life's gone. So I just try to have a piece of what he's doing in whatever I'm doing. So the next question. Actually, I'll go ahead and skip what I had in the order here, because I think this is a really good question from Marie, and I know it's something that we also talked about when we saw what people had an interest to hear tonight. The question is it hard to move forward in your personal life, given the connection your professional life now has with Pat, and how do you manage and balance that?
Yeah. I think that probably there was a point in time when I was living in New York where I was trying to escape my life and to escape the connection that I had to all of it. But I realized that wasn't really what I wanted, and it wasn't possible even if I did want it. So for me to sort of embrace all of this, and really the work that we do day to day is not about Pat. It's about these men and women. And so to be able to help them with their education, to be able to, it's much more forward thinking than it is looking to the past. So.
A good answer.
Thanks.
And this next one is actually just for the scholars, because Marie, you can't answer it. Was it hard to transition from the military? We just talked about this a little bit with kind of how your experience with the military and your experience as a student, how they compare, but was it hard to make that transition? And if so, what obstacles have you faced? And specifically, this person said, do you ever get frustrated, like Reagan mentioned, with your fellow students who may not understand what experiences you've had?
Well, I'm not frustrated with you guys. I love you all. I want to make sure that's clear. There are a lot of veterans in the audience. I mean, everybody's got their own kind of story. We've got members who are still on active duty here, and so for each of us, I think it's definitely different. Kind of transitioning to school for me wasn't maybe as difficult as for somebody who'd come straight out of a combat zone. I had 3 years basically from when I got back from Iraq to when I started school here, but I only gave myself about 2 weeks from when I stopped my service in Virginia and drove a U-Haul truck up here and started school, and I don't recommend that. So it's certainly, you need time, I think, to transition and just kind of figure things out and just decompress a little bit, because it is
The first time Joel and I met Reagan, he had a tuck in his shirt. If that gives anybody an idea.
I don't know what that means.
Military uniforms, you tuck the shirt so it's tight in front. And I believe it was a polo shirt and jeans, but there was a tuck.
But I looked good.
Coming back from a deployment is real reverse culture shock, and I know that many people in here will understand this, but I just remember for me, I had a little bit of time before I came to school as well, so a little bit of time to decompress, but the next day after I got home, my parents had flown out to California to welcome me back, and I just remember going to the grocery store, and it was kind of like that movie Hurt Locker, where he's standing there with all this excess, and it really overwhelmed me. And I remember seeing this woman who was in a hurry and frustrated and complaining, and I thought, what are you doing? And it made me angry. It actually made me angry, because I saw Iraq and I didn't see grocery stores. They don't have those in a lot of the places in that country, and probably in Afghanistan as well. And I had to get over that anger and realize that it's not that person's fault necessarily. It's more an opportunity to engage at whatever level is possible or realistic with the time you're given to try to share with people how amazing this place really is. So getting over that experience, I was a little more forgiving of my classmates coming here, but it's still, I cherish the opportunities to to share the things that I saw overseas with my classmates who haven't served. Sometimes I don't know how best to share those things, and sometimes it's hard, but I kind of view it as more of an opportunity.
So I also had about 2 years after I left the service before I came back to Japan. But my difficult transition was actually from going from Lieutenant Glenn, U.S. Navy, to wife of Major Glenn, United States Marine Corps. That was my big transition point, and it was hard. Until that point, I never really realized how wrapped up my identity was in being in the military. You know, I was sort of. I guess that's the best way to put it. I just really didn't realize how vested my sort of whole being was in being Lieutenant Glenn. And I had this one moment, the first time I drove on base with a dependent ID card. I had to pull my car over and stop myself from hyperventilating because I was so angry. I just, can't even describe. So that was really the hard transition for me. And about 2 years, my husband was still on active duty orders. We were in Corpus Christi, Texas. And, you know, I had a son, I had another baby during that time, but I other than working part-time, I was sort of doing the stay-at-home mom thing. And it was great, and I value that time I had with my children and will always value that. But I felt stagnant, and I felt like my life was doing nothing. I was sort of just treading water in place. So for me, coming to school was the beginning. It was the beginning of the pivot point, and it was nothing but positive. It's been great.
I hear from a lot of veterans, you know, just in discussions like there's never been a sense of purpose that they've had coming back than when they were overseas. And I think that's a difficult transition that a lot of us might have. But what that also gives you is this taste for what it does feel like to feel really purposeful and feel needed in some leadership capacity, which I think causes us to strive for something greater and to strive for a team to serve again and to strive for a culture that you believe in and to be a part of something, as Marie said, that, you know, life is short. I want mine to matter. You know, you want your life to be worth something, contribute to a greater good. Those are all themes I hear, you know, you hear amongst military folks that a lot of folks that are in the civilian world haven't necessarily experienced, and it gives you a high bar to strive for.
So I have two last questions, and then I guess I'll take the note cards. So hopefully we have some ones that hadn't been addressed within these. One last question for Marie, and we also, again, Marie and I discussed all these beforehand, so this isn't practiced, but we did have a conversation. Who was the most influential in helping you start the foundation? And you talked about up here how money started coming in, you know, we had to do something with it, but past that point, like, who did you look to or who did you turn to?
I felt a huge responsibility and obligation for when the money was coming in, that people had entrusted us with this, and I really felt like we wanted to do something worthwhile and good with it. So sort of my process is always to seek out as much information as I possibly can and to learn as much as I possibly can. So that's really what I did. I mean, there's not really one person that was most influential. There were a bunch. I sort of sought out different areas of expertise and gathered information and read a ton of books and that sort of thing. No.
And then a last question for the scholars, and I think some of you have touched on this tonight, but what weight or sense of duty do you carry with you in terms of future public service, either because of your military service, or I like that this question included this, or because of your affiliation with the Tillman Foundation?
So actually, I told Hunter this story a long time ago via email, but and this may sound pat, but it comes back to me to my children. I have a son who's 4.5 and a daughter who's 2.5. And my son was 3 when I got accepted to the Tillman Military Scholar Program. And one of the things we got was a lithograph of Pat in his Arizona Cardinals uniform. And my son saw it. And goes, "Oh, football man!" You know, he was very excited, and very much a little boy. And you know, he was like, "Why do you have a football man? Is that Daddy?" And I was like, "No, that's not Daddy." And so I sort of, tried to explain, you know, in as much as you can to a 3-year-old, you know. And sort of what I said was, you know, well, his name was Pat, just like Daddy's name is Pat, but it's not Daddy. You know, and he was a good guy, and he got hurt, and he's not here anymore. And so now people are trying to remember him by helping everybody else, you know, and surprisingly, my son really absorbed that more than I thought he would. And he sort of related to his dad when his dad came home that night. And so I think, that was sort of my first experience of, wow, I really do have this ability to, influence this next generation. I have these children who really do listen and really do understand more than we give them credit for. And so I think, being a good example to them is very, very important. And that's one of the reasons that I came back to school and want to continue to serve is that, now I have a daughter and I want to be a good example for her of what a strong working mom can be. And so I think that's probably where my biggest sense of responsibility lies these days.
I'll just use this time to plug the Pat's Run that I have just met with Kimberly Kapp she's a student at the business school and was one of the very first students who was sponsored at Arizona State several years ago. And she and I are going to be sponsoring a Pat's Run here in Boston on April 16th of this year. And what that is the major fundraiser that the foundation does every year. It's 4.2 miles. Pat's number was 42. And we're in the works of planning that. So I certainly feel obligated to give back to this organization. I mean, it's a huge privilege to be up here representing all of my classmates who, have done just as much as I have in the military, if not more, with their service. General Ryan is here. I mean, he doesn't need to listen to me talk about my military service, but there is a certain, sense of duty that you always have about giving back. And I feel that, being compelled to serve in whatever professional capacity that may be for this organization. So April 16th, mark your calendars.
So my grandfather used to say all the time, tough times never last, tough people do. And listening to Marie up there and seeing her composure made me think of that quote. There'll always be tough times, and the people that have served in the military in this audience and those that serve in the Pat Tillman Foundation know tough times, but tough people persevere. And after coming out of the military and going to business school, I really want to, like we've all touched on, give back a lot. And I think of folks like Pat Tillman, my younger cousin, who was a very close friend, passed away in service to the Marine Corps in Afghanistan last year, right when we got to school. A couple of my friends here in the audience knew about hearing about our loss of him. His wife's still here, and she's so persevering and just so positive. And anytime I start to feel sorry for myself or think about the future and what I want to do and how hard I want to run and how far I want to go, I think about him and I think about her and I think about the Tillman Foundation and the people that are up here and just want to push harder.
I think I told Hunter this story a while back, but I figured I'd share it. So one of the missions that we did as Cobra pilots was casualty evacuation of other helicopters that were carrying wounded to various hospitals inside of Iraq. And we had a mass casualty mission where there were about 100 Iraqi civilians who were wounded in an attack. And it kept us busy for about 6 to 10 hours that day, going back and forth and trying to take all these Iraqis to the appropriate medical facilities around the country. And I remember looking over on the flight line and seeing a really long line wrapped around the medical facility where some of these Iraqis were being treated. And I didn't know what it was. I was kind of confused. It was people in shorts and T-shirts and civilian clothes and some in uniform. And they were wrapped around the entire building, just waiting in line. And I couldn't figure it out. And then it dawned on me that all those people on the base were standing in line to give blood to Iraqis that they had never met. And that one experience summed up to me how special a place this country is and how much we value life. And that people will go out of their way to save people they don't even know. And that sticks with me here. And I love the fact that the Pat Tillman Foundation recognizes that kind of sacrifice that is inherent in Americans in general and the military. And that's what really motivates me, is to protect that legacy that all of us share.
I appreciate, Joel actually did tell us that story. It was during your interview that you gave us that. One of the questions we have during the interview process for the finalists for the scholarship is what moment, what experience during your military service stands out the most? And I remember you bringing that up. And each of you actually went through that process. It's a 2.5-month selection process, and this is what you get out of it. So I'm actually proud that I'm sitting here with you all and seeing kind of the result of hard work from Marie's end and our other staff members' end to really make an impact.
From your end.
No.
Yeah.
So we have about half a dozen questions here, and how much time do you think we have, Jennifer?
About 15 minutes.
Yeah, so maybe get to 3 of them, maybe more. I'm just trying to look through them and filter a little bit. So a lot of them actually discuss some hot topic, hot button issues today, and I'll get to one of those first, and it was actually in here somewhere about ROTC. So it's easy to see how grad students, especially at a school like this, understand the service of a peer returning from deployment. But how do you help undergrads understand the future service of ROTC students? And I think what this person was getting at is obviously a lot of what's going on at one of you all's peer schools at Columbia. So if anyone can answer that question or speak to that topic, have at it. Oh, that one's done.
No, but I mean, I think it comes back to something that you said about there being more of a national dialogue around this and what service means, and it not just being in a room like this with, you know, a select number of people, but really something that's going on across the country.
And I don't know if I'm the only ROTC person up here, but personally it drives me crazy that more campuses don't have ROTC. And, you know, you're doing a disservice to the military to not open up those doors and allow people to learn about the military and serve inside of school before they actually go down their careers. And I know for me personally, like it totally changed my view of service in ROTC, and having it on campus was incredibly valuable for my classmates, the people I saw every day who were asking me questions about what I did on the weekend or what we did for one of our ROTC classes. And so going back to raising the awareness, that's like a tremendous place to start, is on college campuses across the country.
And I would just add, I think, you know, veterans can work to mentor undergraduates on campuses and kind of provide them with some insight into what our service meant to us. And I know that I see you here in uniform tonight. Thanks for being here. Are you with the Harvard Brigade here, or Boston University? What branch are you going into? Maybe. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your service. So I think, I mean, you know, I'm sure what's your name? I'm sorry. Ian. I'm sure Ian gets questions from his classmates all the time, asking him what's on his uniform or what he's doing with his future, you know, and you have an obligation now to kind of pass this legacy on, and we have an obligation to work. And I think the president of the university here has already made an effort. She spoke with Admiral Mullen in the fall about being committed to bringing ROTC back if the Don't Ask, Don't Tell was rescinded. So it's not an easy process. It's not going to be an overnight fix, and it's not something that you can just do. There's got to be a lot of discussion about how to do it. But the important thing is that we're talking about it.
Agreed, and to get to that, Marie and I have been reading a lot lately about what's going on at Columbia, and to understand a little bit about the process, we select our scholars through an at-large process, half of them, which these students came through, and the other half through partnerships. And Columbia University is actually one of our new university partners for 2011 because of what they're doing for veterans at that campus and because of all the great applicants we've got from them in the past 2 years. So I think the conversation is happening, obviously, because it's been in the news. It's the start. This next question, I'll answer briefly because it's really directed at the work I'm doing. It says, can you explain how this scholarship supplements the GI Bill? So I'll give you kind of a specific answer, and then I'll ask some of you to give your stories of how our scholarships supported you beyond what you're getting from other sources. So the post-9/11 GI Bill was passed 2.5 years ago, and then implemented 1.5 years ago. It is a big improvement on what was in place, the Montgomery GI Bill, and actually just 2 months ago, a revision was passed called GI Bill 2.0, which improves even more what they had for the post-9/11 GI Bill. most people, I would say most civilians, even members of my family, and I'm a civilian myself, would just think, oh, you're a veteran, you're getting money from the GI Bill, it covers everything. For these students specifically, because they're at a private institution, there definitely is a gap. There are also gaps that are present across the board in areas such as funding for those who hadn't served more than 3 years. So there's a system in place that if you serve less than 36 months, you only get a percentage of that GI Bill. There's also gaps that we consider gaps for military families. So you can't transfer benefits to a dependent unless you've served 6 years and committed 4 more or served 10 years. And I believe that is still post 9/11 service. So those are just 2 examples of where there are gaps across the board, and then you reach circumstances with individuals where they maybe just fall through the cracks. I could go on because we have 111 Tillman Military Scholars. Each of them, as a part of the application process, had to identify somewhere where they had financial need. And to give you an understanding of what the scholarship is used for, it's not just for tuition and fees and books. So the GI Bill may cover 100% of your schooling, but you still have need for childcare in the instance of Catherine, because I know she could speak to that, to make sure you have a full-time focus on school and have 100% engagement on campus and get the most out of your experience so you can do what Marie talked about and go on and continue to serve and be service leaders for this next generation. So if you have specific questions about that, definitely feel free to email me and I can send you a memo that I just wrote for the board on what those gaps are. But I'll get to the scholars. If you guys, 1 or 2 of you, want to tell us your story and where your specific gap is, I'd love to hear it.
So I kind of fall into where Hunter described, a student that gets a percentage of my tuition paid for by the post 9/11 GI Bill. I think it's 60%, and I'm over at the business school, which is notoriously extremely expensive. So the way it works for me is like I get 60% of the annual tuition at the most expensive state school in Massachusetts, which turns out to only be a small percentage of what it costs to go to Harvard Business School. So this is helping me a lot. I'm not sure I could actually be here without some of the Pat Tillman Foundation support. I'm from one of those families where my dad didn't graduate college and my mom's a special needs teacher down in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and this is all kind of, I'm paying for a lot of this out of debt. So it helps a lot to have an organization like the Tillman Foundation that supplements the tuition.
Hunter already intonated this, but the Pat Tillman Foundation is paying my children's tuition. No question.
Either you go ahead. We can have more than 2 if you want to. All right. I'll ask another question. And these are just 2 examples. Again, if this is a new plug, we actually just launched a new website, I guess a month ago, and you wouldn't believe how small the staff of the foundation is, but we're pretty small right now. There's just 4 of us in Tempe, Arizona. So I'm kind of the pseudo webmaster as well, and just built our new website. And the biggest improvement that I will point to is that we have an interactive scholar map on there. So if you go to the foundation website, you'll see a link to that. You can read the stories of most of the 111 Tillman Military Scholars and read what their financial need is and read what their story is. So what you've heard tonight is just 4 out of 111. So if you have, again, more questions and you don't want to email me, go to our website and see the impact we're making.
You'll see here tonight, all 4 were actually service members themselves, but some of the people we support are dependents. So we have, in a lot of cases, spouses of injured, and because of the transferability of the GI Bill, they wouldn't be able to go back to school, and they're finding with the injuries that their spouse has sustained due to combat that they really need to go back and sort of refocus to take care of their family. So.
That's Melissa Stroh is who Marie's speaking about specifically. She's at the University of Idaho. So this next question I thought was really good, and most of you, I think, hit on this a little bit, but obviously someone in the crowd wanted to hear more, one of your peers. How can we non-veterans, civilians in military speak, seek to understand the experiences of veterans while both respecting and supporting them?
I think we like, at least I'll speak for myself, I don't mind talking about my experiences. I mean, I think it's a way to, I think it's healthy for as an individual, and I think it's a way to honor the guys who served with us, and I think it's a way to especially honor those guys and gals who didn't come back at all. And there's obviously a way to do that, but we encourage you to not be scared about it, but ask questions that are meaningful. I think, again, if I get the question like, "Oh, you went to Iraq, how was that?" I don't know what you want me to say, you know, like. But if you want to have a dialogue, like I'd love to have a dialogue with you and to tell you exactly what it was like in a given day or a given situation. And I think it benefits everyone. And I would encourage you to not be intimidated by that. And that's really all that we want is just, you know, nobody's seeking anything unique, just, you know, appreciation more than anything, or just understanding.
I have kind of a side question to that. Do you guys think that there's anything, movies or documentaries or books or things, because there's a lot now out on sort of your experiences that are accurate or speak to you, that you could recommend to someone who hadn't had the experience that they might?
I mean,
Is it? Because I think that, you know, mainstream media and entertainment, you get a lot of portrayals of what is going on, and I think sometimes that changes the dialogue in a not so positive way. So I was just curious if you guys thought anything was good that's out there.
I can't think of anything specifically, like any titles off the top of my
Yeah.
head. I think, one movie that's out that I really, really appreciated, because I was a Navy pilot, so this was not my personal experience. I think there's a movie out called Restrepo.
Yeah.
And I thought that was fantastic. And there's a scene there where, you know, two of these Army infantry guys they're dancing around to loud music, and that just reminded me to a T of the air crewmen that I used to serve with. But I think that, to me, I think maybe people who actually served on the ground can speak more to that. But that's a good one. But I think to the question of, you know, are there these unrealistic portrayals? I think there are. And I think the biggest thing that all of you can do is sort of spread the message that, you know, not everyone in the military is the same. We're not this monolithic, you know, clone bot warriors, you know, at all. You know, I myself, I'm a progressive Democrat feminist Navy veteran, like, and I'm a vegetarian, you know, like, so, you know, there's a lot of variety out there. And I think there's sort of this assumption, you know, I mean, even here, my first semester here, I went to a Progressive Students Caucus meeting, and we were sort of introducing ourselves, and I said, "Oh yeah, I was in the Navy for 10 years. And people were like, what are you doing here? You know, and so I think sort of, you know, looking at people as individuals rather than this monolithic military person is the biggest thing that anybody can do.
Yeah. So I've gone out to see films that are, you know, portray the military. I went and saw Hurt Locker with a bunch of my classmates, and despite what you may think of the accuracy of that movie, I wasn't on the ground, and so I can't speak to the accuracy on the ground. But there were definitely scenes that you see that really resonate, and it could spark a dialogue, and it did in my case. I've also had friends who've read books and asked me about what was in the book and whether that was accurate. Generation Kill was one of the books that some of my friends read and asked me about the portrayal of the people in that. And I like that. I like that my friends felt comfortable to come to me and ask me about these books and the movies that they see, and more as a stepping stone into an honest dialogue about my experience and what I saw and my friends' experiences and that kind of thing. So.
And I would recommend the same. Restrepo is the best I've seen. Again, being a civilian who works in the military space, I have to educate myself on a daily basis. And besides reading Where Men Win Glory, which I actually haven't finished, which is the book of The Odyssey of Pat Tillman, and goes into a lot of details about the conflict in Afghanistan, I think that's very educational. But Restrepo is, at least in the case of Afghanistan, been very educational. I actually want to ask the final question and pull it from the list of reserved questions I had coming into tonight, because I remember highlighting it. So, if I even have it, I have Marie's speech here, and then...
We don't need to do that again.
Yeah, I know. So I don't have that question, so I'll go back to what I have in front of me, which is one of the note cards. So this question, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier and what you would tell someone who wants to join the military, or what you tell your students about the military. This person asked, My nephew wanted to join the military out of high school, but his parents pushed for him to choose another career path. What message would you relay to parents of potential military recruits?
I would look them in the eye and say it's one of the greatest decisions that their son or daughter could ever make. I come to an anecdote of that someone once shared with me. They said, think of like the 5 Cy Young Award winners in the past 5 years, or think of the 5 first men to get to the moon, or think of the 10 winners of the Oscars in the past 10 years. You can't recall those things, but think of 5 people that have really cared for you. Or think of 5 people that have been really good listeners for you. Or think of 5 people that are good leaders and that have inspired you. And when I think of those types of people, I think of people I served with. And the opportunity to interact with people of that quality in environments that bring out those qualities is something that I think is just invaluable, and that as a young person you can rarely get except for in the military. So at the age of 18 or at the age of 25, responsibility far greater than many people throughout their entire careers will ever have. I used to tell my guys on the ground, you might forget about it because we feel disconnected, but back home, your communities are reading about you in the newspaper. You are on the front page of the New York Times today. You are on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post, because people wonder and care about what's happening over here. And at the age of 19, you're like a mayor of this little city or this village. You're doing nation building. You are, at the age of 19, you're interacting with people that are leaders in their communities. And to give a young person that responsibility at that age, I think is the greatest thing as a country we can do.
That kind of actually, the question I had starred is a broader question to that situation, and it is, what advice can you give to a generation of future leaders in terms of identifying, embracing, and learning from the kind of crucible experience that Pat's death must have been for you, and in your instances that the military service you performed had for you? So if anyone else has any final comments on that, I think we had closing remarks from Marie, but I don't know if there's anything prepared, so I'll leave it open to you all to say some final words and leave some final thoughts with your classmates tonight.
I guess the advice I would give people who are thinking about this or have friends or family members who are thinking about it is, do it and support each other. If it's a family member, support the family member. And it's so hard on family members to have somebody in the military, as Marie shared earlier, and so many spouses here have probably endured. And I just think step out on a limb and do it, and you won't regret it. Some of my best friends in the world come from my Marine Corps experience, and the crazy Henry V, we band of brothers. That's true. It's really true.
I think I would add to that, as a mother of midshipman Glenn, class of 2028. I think I would definitely say, do it. It's an honorable profession. It's a good profession. You will gain more from it than you give, even though you can give a whole heck of a lot, But also go into it with your eyes wide open. My husband and I were complete opposites. Like I mentioned before, for me, the Naval Academy was an act of rebellion. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. My husband went to the Naval Academy a year ahead of me. His dad was a World War II Marine. His brother was a Marine. His sister's still a Marine warrant officer. So he came from a very, very Marine Corps family. And he had a very idealized vision of what the Naval Academy and what the Marine Corps were going to be. And so kind of like, Marie mentioned when Pat came back from Iraq, from his first deployment, there's a reality that is not the ideal. It is hard work, and it is a lot of paperwork, and it is, dealing with 19-year-old chuckleheads all day, and it's sweat and grime, and a lot of those things I think people don't realize. Not to dissuade anybody from doing it, but just to say, think about it and think about what this really means, and have realistic expectations of what you're going to be doing and what your life is going to be like.
I think everyone has really, everyone's covered a lot of the really salient points here tonight. But for me, the Marine Corps, set me off on a trajectory for the rest of my life. I think it really instilled a lot of values in me, or taught me kind of what's really important. And so I'm going to take that with me forward. I want to reiterate thank you to everyone for being here tonight, and to Marie and to Hunter for coming all the way out here. I know that you have everybody's got in the middle of midterms, and so this is valuable time, but I really appreciate it. And thanks to all the guys and gals out there who've served. We can identify with you, and it's been a very comforting thing coming to graduate school and having that instant bond with you. So thanks.
So to echo what Reagan said real quick, and to get our thanks in, thank you for General Ryan for being here tonight. We actually are meeting with him tomorrow, so we can talk about some of this if you have any questions. I'd like to thank the Center for Public Leadership. Again, Jen, and I see Jennifer here, and Jeff and Donna. I've seen all your pictures and read all your profiles. I don't know if I'm missing anyone, but if I am, thank you for being here. And most specifically, thank you to those of you here who have served in the military, or are serving in the military, or are going to serve in the military, because obviously that's what's brought us all here tonight, and I can't thank you enough. I know that we have a reception afterwards, so please join us if you have any specific questions for our celebrities here tonight, the Tillman Military Scholars. They'll be signing autographs in the corner on the right. If you have any questions for Marie and I about the work of the foundation, we're here all night as well. We're staying just down the street. So thanks again, and I appreciate your time. Yeah.
Here, and I should use this time and know that it's precious and use it for something good. So that lasted, I'd say, probably about a month or so. And then we learned that he was actually killed by fratricide. And sort of what ensued after that were many years of lies and investigations. And I really got lost. I got caught up in sort of my own grief and the fight to find out what happened. And I think that from that point, what I really wanted was an escape. I was just trying to survive, and I didn't have the energy or, anything like that to try and change the world. So I left Fort Lewis and I moved to New York. And I thought, okay, let me just sort of get lost in this city and I'll wander the streets. And, I really craved sort of to be able to just be anonymous and just kind of like get caught up in the energy of the city. So I moved to New York, and I found a job with ESPN television network. And I took this job, and it was really kept me extremely busy. I basically just threw myself into my work. I traveled all over the country, and I did events and sort of catered to athletes and celebrities. And I had a good time. I loved the people that I worked with. But it was a soulless job, and I knew that it was a soulless job. So while I was very distracted and not happy, I wouldn't call it happy, but I was certainly distracted and content enough. So I just sort of went about my days and did my job and did the things that I knew that I was supposed to do. And at night, I sort of reserved that time to sort of wallow in my grief and try and figure out how to put the pieces of my life back together in a way that would be meaningful to me. And sort of all along at this time, there was this nagging in the back of my head of, remember that path that you started together, and remember that feeling of wanting your life to be worth something more than just your individual little life. And, remember how you wanted to do something that was going to be impactful and meaningful, and this precious life that you have, what are you doing with it? And I didn't really feel great about it at the time, but I was still sort of just trying to get by. And so I would try to cut myself a little bit of slack, and I would try not to get too angry at myself that I wasn't able at that time to really focus on the things that I wanted to focus on. So that sort of went on for a couple years. And then about 3 years after Pat was killed, the investigations were sort of gone, and, we'd kind of everything.
I'd like to thank the Center for Public Leadership for all their hard work in putting this event together, especially Jen Wardell, who's worked tirelessly in arranging all of this. I'd like to thank Hunter and Marie for being here this evening, traveling to join us. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here to hear quite an inspirational story. Many people Many of you are familiar with the story of Pat Tillman. He's an NFL star. He made national news when he left the National Football League to join the U.S. Army and become a Ranger. I was a senior in college at the time, and I vividly remember being inspired when I heard the news about Pat deciding to turn down an NFL contract and join the armed services, because I had already done my training for the Marine Corps and was headed into the Marines as an officer upon graduation, and it reaffirmed my commitment that what I was doing was a noble and worthy cause. Tragically, as we all know, Pat was killed in Afghanistan in 2004, and it was an event that really shook the nation. A year later, I found myself in Afghanistan, passing through Bagram Air Base, and spent a few short hours at the Pat Tillman USO, which was named in his honor. And I remember being there, looking around and just kind of feeling a sense of awe and reverence for the man for whom the building was named. I didn't know that I'd be here now 6 years later, standing in front of you tonight with the honor of being a Tillman Military Scholar and having the privilege of introducing someone whose life is equally as inspiring. We're here tonight to hear from Marie Tillman, who is the founder and chair of the Pat Tillman Foundation. She's a native of San Jose, California, who graduated with honors from the University of California, Santa Barbara. And after her husband's death, Marie was instrumental in founding the Tillman Foundation in 2004. And it was created to honor Pat by investing in veterans and their families and helping them to return to college and pursue an education. Since its inception, the Tillman Foundation has given $1.3 million to veterans and their families to return to school. And they currently sponsor 111 veterans at 46 schools around the country, veterans and family members, 46 schools around the country in 28 states. Hunter just gave me all the statistics when he got here tonight. I want to make sure I got those right. We have 5 Tillman Military Scholars here at Harvard, all graduate students, and we'll be speaking with you later. But tonight, please join me in welcoming Marie Tillman.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you. Like a lot of people, I think my road to service is one that took a lot of turns and many detours along the way. I grew up in a Northern California town, sort of a small community, and my childhood was not really geared towards service. It wasn't something that was necessarily instilled in us. We participated in school food drives, and we, gathered our clothing and our toys and we donated them to shelters and that sort of thing. But it wasn't really part of my upbringing. So service was something that really came more into my life at a much later time. When I was growing up was actually also when I met my husband, though. And I think that, while we both led relatively sheltered existence in sort of this small community in Northern California, he had a much more, his childhood was much more full of stories of service and sacrifice, and his family really sort of ingrained in them the honor of serving in the military, and a lot of their family members served in the military. So that was definitely much more a part of his upbringing. So we went to college, and really didn't think that much about what it was that we wanted to give back to our communities or to the country. But I think that, like a lot of people in this room, when September 11th happened, we really took a step back. And at that time, Pat was playing football with the Arizona Cardinals, and we led this really great life. We had friends and family that were close by in Phoenix, and we traveled and we enjoyed our time there, and it was really just sort of a great sort of happy existence. But September 11th happened, and we took a step back and said, this is something important that's going on at this point in our country, and really something that we wanted to participate in a much more meaningful way. We wanted to sort of gear our lives towards something that was more meaningful at the time. And Pat in particular felt that calling to serve. And so he decided that he would join the Army. So, we did a lot of research, and I supported the decision. I thought that it was something that would sort of be, I mean, I naively thought that this would be, an adventure. And 3 years later, we would go back to our normal life. And, it would be one of those things where when we were old, we would think back and go, oh, remember when you were in the military and wasn't that so fun and great and, this great thing that you did? And in a lot of ways, I think that it was a great thing that he did, but certainly the road went a different direction than we originally thought. So we left this life in Arizona and we moved up to Fort Lewis, Washington. And really, this was my indoctrination into what it means to be not only part of a military family, but also what it means to serve. And it was drastic, to say the least. It was difficult. Shortly after Pat was out of basic training, he deployed to Iraq. And I had a really hard time. I was home alone in Washington, and I didn't really know anybody. And I was really worried. There was no communication at that time. It was right in the beginning of the Iraqi war. And so, I sort of sent him off without knowing at all where he was going or what he would be doing or when I would hear from him. So it was really stressful. But I think that even though it was difficult at that time, there was a lot of really great things that came from that as well. For me, it was the first time that I felt like our lives were part of something that was bigger. I felt like we were focused on something that was greater than the individual, and we really became a part of this military family. And I liked that experience. I liked that feeling of being part of something that was greater than we were and really focused on sort of contributing to a greater good. So, while there were difficult times, there was also a lot of positive stuff that came out of his first sort of deployment overseas. And thankfully, he came back home safely. And I think that when he came home, it was another big wake-up call. It was the realization that the ideals for which he had joined, there's a reality to that. And there's a reality to the hardships that soldiers go through, that their families go through, and what it means to serve your country and serve overseas. And so, he came back definitely sobered from the experience, but still very much he still very much believed in the reasons why he joined. He believed in, sort of what this country was built upon: freedom and equality and democracy, and all of these ideals were definitely things that he still believed in. But it was a more difficult experience than I think we both originally thought. So shortly after he came back from Iraq, he was home for a little while, and then he deployed to Afghanistan. And during this time, too, for me, it was something that I became much more involved and interested in the conflicts overseas. I started reading up on what was going on. And, up until this point, I was very removed from, I think, what was going on, not only politically in Washington and internationally, but just sort of not as engaged or interested in what was going on. And I felt like now these things were personally affecting me, that decisions that were being made were having a direct impact on my husband's life and my life. And, I would sort of talk to my friends and my colleagues and people I would encounter, and I felt like everybody was really apathetic and didn't really care that much. And they weren't engaged, and I was frustrated. And, it was kind of an awakening for me to realize that I had been just like them. I mean, we, even up until the point, I would say, until Pat went overseas, we had made this decision together and he had joined, and we were very sort of happy with ourselves and proud to be a part of this military family. But I hadn't really dug in and learned that much about what that meant. And so I started to become a little bit more vocal, and I would sort of, implore my friends and family members and colleagues to sort of get involved and get engaged and know what's going on. And, I realized that, when you sign up and you decide to serve, that you're really sort of giving your lives up to the American people and politicians in Washington. And you're saying, here's my life, and I dedicate it to you in service of this country. And what I need from you is for you to not needlessly put me in harm's way. You need to know that my life is valuable and make decisions that speak to that. And I didn't really realize that at all before this happened. And so, I would talk to people about that, and I became a little bit more vocal than I think I had been in the past. So Pat went to Afghanistan, and unfortunately, he didn't come back safely this time. And it was devastating for me. I felt like my world just completely crumbled. And I had, within sort of all of that fog of grief in the very beginning, though, there was a little bit of clarity, strangely, that came, particularly in the first sort of month or so. And I had this realization that life is short, and that, I wanted mine to matter. I wanted to continue this journey of service that we had started together, and I wanted to make sure that my time, however long or short that I had left on this planet, was used for something good. That he was gone, but I was still here.